Good afternoon, folks. I'm just going to let everybody slowly get adjusted to their Zoom. We'll take a moment. I'll spend a few minutes just filling the air here as people slowly sign into their Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Tzom Kal to those who are fasting. I hope you're having a good fast, and to everyone, I hope you're having a meaningful day. This is definitely a very different Yom Kippur, but I could say that every year we do this Forgive Me Film-a-thon, and that is definitely the same, and we're glad to see so many of you. By the way, don't be shy, and this is the time where you could show us your living rooms, and keep your cameras on. We're always happy to see our community and to have you here. So feel free to turn on your cameras and keep them on throughout. I do recommend, once the actual conversation starts, to then switch to speaker view so you could see our speakers in close-up. And I'm just going to give it one more minute to let some more people join the conversation. I hope many of you have seen the films or had a chance to see the films. If not, they are still available, will be available on our website, but for free throughout the day. So you can check out the films there. We're very excited about the conversation, which will start in just one moment. So bear with us as we get started. We're going to have some clips and a lot of other information. I'm also going to take this opportunity to give a shout out to the Parent Circle, who have been a partner with us for many events and are partnering on this as well. We originally partnered with them when we showed One Day After Peace at our Other Israel Film Festival years ago. This year's Other Israel Film Festival, I'm excited to announce, is going to be December 3rd to the 10th. It will most likely be completely virtual, but it should be even more exciting than ever. So please join us. Giving a shout out to Hannah Brown, who's joining us from Jerusalem. She's, I'm sure, read some of her reviews and articles in the Jerusalem Post. Thank you for being here, Hannah. And I think we'll get started. First, I'll start by sharing a little bit of the history of this event. I think it's over 10 years that we've been having the Forgive Me Film-a-thon on Yom Kippur. It's kind of a very untraditional event and a way for people like me who don't necessarily feel as comfortable in a synagogue and feel more reflective with a film. Having this space was something that the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan created, along with actually some downtown partners, the 14th Street Y and a few downtown synagogues who were brave enough back then to take this on. Now everybody's doing virtual programs on Yom Kippur, so it's not as big of a deal, but I think this approach of, as far as reflecting through film, is something that is meaningful to us here at the Marlene Meyerson JCC every week, every year, throughout with all of our films. And I will just share with you some of our upcoming films that we're excited about. I mentioned the Other Israel Film Festival will be this season. This season we also have a film course on new Israeli cinema. So that's starting October 12th, just after the holidays. So you can join for a weekly course through that. And then tomorrow night, we have a screening or a conversation as well. So join us for A Call to Spy. It's an IFC film that's coming out, and we're doing a special preview with it that's going to be available starting tomorrow. And the conversation's tomorrow night at 7:30 with the actors and the director. And it follows Winston Churchill's special operations, who enlisted women as spy to kind of sabotage during World War II and create resistance. A fascinating film, and we're gonna have great speakers there. We also have next week, we have the film Mighty Ira, a special premiere of that film about Ira Glasser, who was for 23 years the leader of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. He'll be joining us for that as well. Also, if we're in the spirit of the holidays, we're doing a special screening of Get Out, or a conversation about the film, the horror thriller Get Out that I think has deep political statements, but most importantly talks about hospitality, which I think is a perfect theme for Sukkot, and we're excited to have that program there. I'll just share one bit of information before I introduce our guests for today. But I'm remembering that I spent some formative years in Jerusalem, and of course, Israel, Yom Kippur, the entire country basically shuts down, and some people ride bikes through the streets, and I'm eager to hear a little bit about what Yom Kippur was like in Israel today from our guests. But back then, I also had trouble back then connecting through traditional prayers, and ended up always looking for a way to gather with friends and have some sort of like, David Lynch marathon, or watch some movies and then have some discussions, and actually found much more meaning in that path. And in some ways that tradition lives on here through the Forgive Me Film-a-thon. And I want to quote, since I'm not a rabbi, I'll quote our executive director of the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, Rabbi Joy Levitt, who wrote to me earlier this week. She was writing to somebody about this event, and she mentioned that, I'm quoting her now, "There are many paths into our tradition, many ways to find meaning in Judaism. We do not judge. Our job is to provide as many doorways in to help people live lives of meaning and purpose. For many of us, the liturgy is supremely successful. For others, they find their way in through art, nature, or secular literature. We do not judge." So thank you all for joining us for this non-judgmental conversation. And I'm excited now to introduce our fabulous guests. I will start with Robbie Damelin, who, for those of you who have seen One Day After Peace, you know her intimately. And for those who do not yet, I'm sure right after this conversation, you will know her very well and be running to watch the film. I have to say that when I think about forgiveness, One Day After Peace is the first film that comes to mind. Robbie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
And then we are joined by one of Israel's most legendary, I don't want to age him too much, but legendary and most successful directors who his films has completely changed Israeli cinema. And I was thinking about this for this upcoming course that we're having about new Israeli cinema. Avi Nesher is the person who led the way and has changed Israeli cinema, and is actually rarely also one of the people that helped create it in its more formative years, and is of course the director of The Other Story. Avi Nesher, thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure being with you. I haven't been to New York for quite some time, and it takes me back. I grew up in New York City, so I kind of feel at home with you, and this Zoom business is quite miraculous. So for the next hour, I'm going to feel. I grew up on 92nd Street, on 72nd and Central Park West, so I'm right around the corner from you, so I feel right at home. So thank you for inviting me.
You could smell the Zabar's coffee, I'm sure.
Yes, indeed.
I also want to introduce one more surprise guest. I think this is the moment to do it. And we're excited to have here the star of The Other Story and of other Avi Nasher films and many others. She's actually now going to be very soon in an HBO Max show that's going to make a lot of noise. And please welcome Joy Rieger, who can join us for the conversation as well. Joy has turned on her camera.
Yes, wait.
And we hear you.
You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Hello, everyone.
Joy, thank you so much for being here. I want to start off with a question first to all three of you, as far as how did you celebrate or honor your Yom Kippur today? First of all, what does Yom Kippur mean to you? And I realize that this year might be a little different than other years, but what was Yom Kippur like for you today? Robbie, let's start with you.
Well, Yom Kippur starts with, for me, by phoning people that I've been nasty to throughout the year to say sorry and mean it. It's very quiet, but then there's anyway a closure. So in fact, it doesn't make very much difference between today and yesterday when there was nobody in the streets in any event. So what I love about Yom Kippur is that you can hear the birds in the morning. And it doesn't mean anything religiously for me, but I can say that talking in a synagogue in White Plains to 3,000 people with a Palestinian partner was one of the most moving experiences that I've had in the States. And God knows I'm in the States often enough. I'm an honorary citizen. So I think that's for me, Yom Kippur. I don't do religion very well.
Avi, would you like to share?
Well, for me, Yom Kippur is a strange day. I went to Ramaz, Jewish high school in New York City, as a very secular Israeli boy, and I was very resistant to religion when I grew up, as many secular Israelis are. And we have become a country polarized between those who are religious and those who are not. And for me, Yom Kippur is a day where is a day about trying to find ways to live together. I don't know if you guys follow it, but in Israel, the coronavirus is being blamed on various groups and sectors, be it religious people, or be it Arabs, or be it this, or being that. And Israeli society is being torn up now in ways like American society. We have leadership that plays the same games pretty much. So this year's Yom Kippur theme was togetherness, and by forgiveness, we try to forget our differences and to forgive the malice that we showed each other. And this is a very special Yom Kippur in Israel. Yom Kippur in Israel also is, when the Great War with Egypt was 40 odd years ago, and my generation is the generation that fought in that war. And the film that I'm making now describes an event that took place. And it's being told from two different narratives of the same story. An Egyptian narrative and an Israeli narrative. And when as I'm working on this movie, I realized that again, the only way to find any peaceful coexistence is by accepting the legitimacy of the other story, of people who think totally different than you are, and you might disagree with them completely, but you have to completely accept the way they perceive reality, which is different than yours. So I'm a secular Jew who celebrates Yom Kippur.
Joy, what is Yom Kippur to you, and what did you do today?
I spent time with my family because I don't see them a lot now because of the coronavirus. But I think like in the other story movie, I spent time talking to God, have a little conversation with him about my sins and the things that I want to get better in the next year. And I spent a lot of time working on our next movie, the movie I'm doing with Avi. And it was quiet, and it was very weird. It was very new. It was very because I used to go walking in the streets with my friends, and now we are all closed down. Yeah.
Indeed, a strange day, and not normal for any of us here in New York either.
Yeah.
They're not so quiet here from what's going on outside my window. I want to jump into talking about in general, before we get into actually your films, but talking about in general, this concept of, I believe strongly in cinema as a tool for change. I think that I think a lot of what we do at the JCC is to show films to impact people, and I think every film changes people for good or for bad. Some some Hollywood films might not always have their finger on the pulse of how people should change. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on if cinema, if the films that you work on, how you hope to impact people, and if you think change is a part of making films. Avi, let's start with you this time. I'll switch it around each time.
I'm a firm believer in the effect cinema has on a given society, on a given culture. As I make Israeli movies, God knows that the money that you get paid is no reason to make a movie here. And since I hate getting up so early in the morning, the only reason one makes a movie, as far as I'm concerned, is because one can have impact. I'm a great believer in watching cinema in cinema houses. You know, it's the power of 400, 500, 600 people, you know, watching one narrative, listening to the same voices, to the same arguments. It's a very powerful thing. You know, in Judaism, you have to pray in a minyan. Minyan means 10 people. And I don't think God is so hard of hearing that he needs 10 voices in order to hear prayers. I think the idea is to do something, you know, within a community. And cinema traditionally is something that has brought people together. You know, I mean, for me, a movie house is a house of ritual. You know, it's our way of praying. It's our way of sharing ideas. So, for my very first, I made my first movie many years ago, and it ended with something called the Song of Peace. It was a movie called Halahaka, and was extremely popular in Israel, and ended with a plea for peace in a country in Israel that was not so open, you know, to peaceful coexistence at that point. And President Sadat came to Israel, you know, just shortly afterwards. And I don't dare think that we brought him to Israel, but I think in our small little way, we made this this dialogue between these two countries more possible. So yes, I'm a staunch believer in the power of cinema, and I think in order for cinema to be meaningful, it has to reach out to a wide audience. You know, I don't do esoteric cinema, and I don't do something where I think my movies are just too good for people to understand. I think movies should be relevant to everybody, and I think they should be artistic, but they should certainly carry you know, relevant meaning.
Joy, let me ask you too. What do you hope would be the impact of film, and do you seek to, when you make films, to for film to change people?
I think there are not a lot of characters like women for women in this country, in Israel, because there are not a lot of movies. But all the movies I did with Avi, I trust him so much and his point of view and the story he wants to tell, and I'm focusing on playing the part that is writing for me, and I'm hoping that the impact will be from my performance, and I'm trying to give my trust in my director and the script writer, and I'm just trying to be as much as correct with the part, and just give life to this part, and then just be as much as I can attached to the script. I mean,
I'm thinking about everything that both of you are saying, and I mean, it just occurs to me, of course, that I feel like the core to acting and telling the story, the core of that is going through some sort of change. And every character in every one of the movies has to go. If the characters stay static, I mean, it's an artistic choice, but I think doesn't necessarily bring to a classic narrative that has, I think, a following from audiences.
I take it sometimes even further. I wrote some essay about my movies that almost all my characters are rebels to one extent or another. And I think this is the part that cinema has to play. I mean, cinema, you know, is a catalyst for change. Cinema, you know, as a catalyst to introducing new thoughts and new ideas. And just like Joy said, I've noticed that my last 5, 6 movies, the leads were women, and the movies, were told from a feminine point of view. And I think God knows that the revolution which is taking place in the world now, bolsters, the importance of women and the way they play part in society. And I think cinema is very much a part of it.
I want to get back to that point in a moment, but I want to bring Robbie into this conversation as well, as far as Robbie. And then let me ask you specifically, because you're an activist for change on every day, but where was the decision to make a movie, and how important is that? Where did you see a power in film to push your message forward?
Well, yes, of course, it opened doors all over the world, but there was something much deeper for me personally, because I wanted to go back to South Africa. Obviously, you can get from me that some people didn't see the film, but that's where I was born and grew up in the anti-apartheid movement. And I wanted to meet perpetrators and victims and see what had happened, who had given evidence at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because I wanted to see where they were today, 20 years later. Also, for me personally, it was important that we would learn lessons to adapt, perhaps for Israel. But even deeper than that was my own journey of looking to see if I'm honest and what is the meaning of forgiving. And so there were many things. Actually, when Erez and Miri came to talk to me, it was just to really find contacts in South Africa, but we suddenly discovered that perhaps it would be better if it wasn't a film that would be acted, but the person who would be the protagonist would be somebody like me who lost a child, who went through a process of reconciliation, although I was already there. When they came to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, the first thing I said was, you can't kill anybody in the name of my child. But nevertheless, this whole trip to South Africa, all the work that we did and the film itself was an opportunity for me personally to look at my honesty, but also it opened the hearts of even the hardest of characters, because the work in the parent circle is all about the personal narrative and about bringing hope. And so I had this opportunity to meet with people who told their stories. I told my story. And how could people not be moved by watching Jin Fourie, this South African woman who had lost her daughter, and Lechlapo, who was the man who was responsible for sending the people to kill her daughter. How could they not be moved when she said, forgiving is giving up your just right to revenge? And he said, by her forgiving me, she has released me from the prison of my inhumanity. For me, that was a huge lesson. So I'm so grateful to, this woman became my sister, which is what happens with all bereaved mothers. But I'm so grateful to Erez and to Miri, because they never made me do anything twice. That was my condition of doing the film. And I really love them because they respected me and were so compassionate and understanding, because it was difficult. It was very difficult.
I love that, because it really brings up also one of the things I wanted to discuss, which is the two sides of forgiveness. There's the person who's asking for forgiveness, and there's the person who then forgives. And those are two different deep and powerful obstacles that need to be done, I think, in the right way and have huge impact. And I was going to share a few clips here today. And one clip that I wanted to share was apart from One Day After Peace, which was the first scene I thought of for forgiveness, and we'll get to that in a moment. But one moment that comes to mind is I was thinking about apology and forgiveness and how to correctly apologize. And in today's world, I've seen a lot of bad apologies, really bad apologies. A lot of them were coming out in the last few years, especially when it has to do relating to women's issues and treatment of women. And knowing that a lot of people, notable people, were coming out to apologize and hearing the details of every apology. And what I consider to be a good apology is what I'm going to share with you right now. There's one good apology in my mind, but I'd love to hear Robbie, Avi, and Joy's your reaction to this apology. I'm going to share this with everyone now. 1 second here. As you can see, I have a very sophisticated taste in cinema. That is Moana, for those of you who are not familiar. I always thought about the specifics of Maui's apology there, which are so simple. But there's no buts. There's no because. It's simple ownership and absolute acknowledgement of what he did wrong. Any thoughts from anyone on the panel here?
Well, you see, I don't think that forgiving is anything to do with the other person. I think forgiving is very personal. And I don't think that you can be contingent on repentance to forgive, because if you are, you will remain a victim for the rest of your life. If you are willing to let yourself be at peace with yourself, that's when you can forgive. But many people are on this path of being victims because they feel guilty in a way that perhaps if they do go on the path of forgiving, that would be being disloyal to the person that they lost or that they would forget. But I can only say that when I wrote the initial letter to the man who killed David to his family, that was when I gave up being a victim, and that was the beginning of being able to move on with my own life. And so I don't think apologies are a big word. If you are waiting for somebody to apologize, you may be waiting for the rest of your life. And I don't want to wait for the rest of my life for somebody to say, I'm sorry. It's not about that. It's about, Bassam says something extraordinary. Bassam Aramin, his daughter was killed by an Israeli soldier. And he said for him, forgiving is almost an act of revenge. I know that sounds extraordinary. And he said to the soldier who actually killed his daughter, his 10-year-old daughter, he said, I will forgive you if you come to talk to me. And that is for his own peace of mind. Don't be a victim. If you are a victim, you can never move on with your life.
Avi, you were going to add?
Yeah, I agree with Robbie through a different perspective. I really think apologies don't do much for forgiveness. I think in order to achieve forgiveness, one is to create a situation which is forgiveness friendly. In order to forgive, you need to be able to tell yourself a story why what has happened is acceptable, even though it may not be acceptable, which is again why I so strongly believe in the power of story, because when we are wronged, of course, I mean, we have been wronged, and we are totally right, and the other side is totally wrong, and therefore we expect an apology from the other side, and so on and so forth. And in a way, to apologize goes against human nature, because people act in their selfish best interest, and the whole idea of right or wrong is something that we have made up. I mean, I take forgiveness over justice any given day. So for me, forgiveness is something that needs to be achieved through work and not through words. And again, I believe in if one can tell a story that encompass different points of view and explain why things happen that might contradict each other, I think forgiveness is being able to accept. I think if you've been struck by tragedy, it's too much to ask of you just to let the tragedy go by. I mean, I can tell you from personal experience that tragedies do not pass just because somebody has apologized or just because you have granted forgiveness in the Christian sense of the word. I mean, at some point.
But I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you think about it, when after I'd written the letter to the parents of the man who killed David, that sense of relief, but there was also an understanding that they told me through two Palestinians from our group that their son had seen his uncle violently killed when he was a small child. And he lost two further uncles in the second uprising. And that was his path of revenge. People think that revenge might help, but unfortunately, there is no revenge. I promise you I would do anything on earth if I could bring David back. And revenge never works. And he now, for the rest of his life, the man who killed David will be in prison.
You're totally right. Revenge doesn't work, but if you survey the history of literature and theater and cinema, revenge is just about the most common motivation to the most human action. So to avenge is human, to forgive divine, and we are not gods. You know, we are people, and we have to be helped, you know, to forgive. And I admire greatly your ability to forgive. I think it's an extraordinary thing. But on a wider social, historical level, forgiveness is something that greater powers need to work on. I mean, the whole idea of forgiveness. I mean, we have forgiven the Vietnamese people. They have forgiven us. God knows atrocities were committed by both sides. But you know, current storytelling, you know, does not portray the Vietnamese as evil, nor does it portray the Americans as evil. We found a way of retelling all stories in a way that encompass, you know, horrible acts of vengeance and violence in some kind of an acceptable way that allows us to go on, you know, and forgive in a sensible sort of manner. So I really believe in the greatest sense of forgiveness, which is accepting, you know, the validity of someone to take vengeance against you. You know, I mean, I totally, Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, once said that if you were a young Palestinian, you would probably join the Hamas, you know. So again, for us to understand the mentality of the enemy and for the enemy to understand our mentality, that is the path to forgiveness, you know, to accept the legitimacy of the way, you know, two different sides view the same story. So I believe, again, that's why I believe so much in cinema, because cinema can bring, you know, people with opposing points of view into one theater and tell them one story that encompasses experiences on both sides.
Well, I watched your film and I love the fact that you got to the point where they suddenly started to listen to each other with empathy. And I think that is the beginning of a path to peace. Because even in our group, when we run a parallel narrative group, what we are learning, even if we don't agree, is to listen with empathy. And that's what happened in your film towards the end. And I really felt it physically, that was what was happening. And for me, that is the most important part of the work that we do, is to have this empathy to listen, even if you don't agree, because it opens up your understanding of the other, of how he sees his story or how he sees his history. And I loved your film for that.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If you recall, Joy Rieger plays brilliantly the character of Anat in the movie, and her grandfather really can't stand her because she has become very, very religious, very devout, and he's a psychologist and he's very, very secular, and she really gets on his nerves, and they're really at each other's throat throughout the whole movie. And at the very end, you know, they don't become friendly, you know, they don't accept each other's view, but they find a way to coexist. And the very last word, which is uttered in the other story, is tolerable, you know. I mean, so, I mean, I think, you know, just as excellent is the enemy of very good, you know, peace is the enemy of survival. And I just think, you know, I mean, if we find a way to accept, you know, our own folly and the other side's folly, and life becomes tolerable, that is a great thing for human beings to achieve.
Let me actually, Joy, I want to bring you into this for a moment just to.
I just wanted to add that to Avi also, that I think by playing the part of Anat, I think that Anat, she wants her father to ask for her forgiveness. She wants to forgive him about her old childhood. But at the end of the movie, I think she understands that she has to accept herself by all means, that she became religious, and that she's not the girl that they both wanted, and that she's not the little girl anymore, and she wants to be like a grown up in her own world. And I think that the minute she understands that she cannot accept her father forgiveness, she accepts herself, and she begins to maybe love herself. I don't know, maybe 1 year after she's more accepting, but she begins to love herself at the minute she understands that she doesn't need her father forgiveness, that she doesn't need her father to like ask for her forgiveness.
It's interesting. I think I noticed in the film, I don't, with all the conflict that exists in the other story, I don't know if there's a moment where somebody actually apologizes. It's more everybody learning to accept one another and to feel apology. I'm going to show a quick clip, if that's okay, because I worked really hard on putting these clips together. I want to share just one moment of, I think, forgiveness that exists in the other story. So I apologize if this is not the key moment, but I think it's a good one. Also, I apologize for any spoilers in any of the films, any of the clips that we show in advance. If you haven't seen the film yet, watch it right afterwards. I promise it won't ruin too much. Let me share. There's a moment of non-literal apologies and possible forgiveness. I won't give away more than that. Joy, tell us about that scene.
I think that in this moment, as an actress, I was more focused on the bonding between her and her father, and like more than the character of Nathan, because of her husband, because Shachar, because I think that this is the moment when she realized that the two men of her life, they both let her down, and in this moment her father wins because he's there for her, and he's removing his ego, and he's just there for her, and he's looking at her, and he's accepting her and her decisions, and he's just like do whatever you want, and I'm beside you, and I'm here for you, and I'm your father for the first time in my life, and I'm here, and just like do whatever you feel like. And Shachar, her husband, is like he really messed up, and he lied to her, and now he has a lot of work to do for her forgiveness. And I think in this moment she has a little daughter-father bond, and I think as an actress I really like focused on this part, on this moment.
It's a beautiful moment in the film, of course, in a beautiful film in general. Avi, it actually also relates to throughout the film. Your often characters are having moments where they escape into a little bit of a dream, where they have a moment of what they're imagining, based on what one of the characters says in the film, what they're imagining could be, versus what is happening in reality. I'm going to show a quick scene of that, and then maybe you could help us understand why you chose to throw in these moments throughout the film. It's an interesting artistic choice. So give me 1 second here to show it. Here's one example of a scene like that.
It's the reason the reason I love cinema is because you get to recreate reality. It's not reality. Or as Hitchcock said, don't cry Ingrid, it's only a movie, right? So you are creating this reality that exists only within a movie. And the only way to combat reality is through imagination. You know, I mean, we cannot undo the past. We can just reimagine it. And when you create a movie, I mean, the great thing about cinema is the suspension of disbelief. Cinema is a very, very childish persuasion. We see cinema the way children, you know, perceive life using great imagination. So if a movie is really good, and if the characters are really good, and if you have a great actress like Joy Rieger, you know, who evokes great sympathy from an audience, you are creating an alternate reality. And by using your imagination, you can really change reality. And again, I can tell you about the other story regarding this tremendous strife that exists in today's Israel between the Orthodox and the secular. You know, it almost approaches anti-Semitism because now the Orthodox are being blamed from the coronavirus and this and that. But it's a very extreme thing. And I was told that in Jerusalem movie houses, when the movie was shown there, they had mixed audiences of Orthodox and secular Jews sitting in the theater. And as a filmmaker, I could hope for nothing better. You know, if your movie can present an alternate reality using the imagination, you know, again, which is the only shield we have against reality, because again, we cannot undo reality. If you can reimagine life, if we can reimagine, you know, Joy's character and Sasson Gabai's character coming together, you know, I mean, I know I'm going John Lennon on you, but it's kind of, you know, I mean, your imagination is really just about the best medicine you have against grim reality, because, you know, if you just watch the news, I mean, you'll be really, really depressed. I really think that, you know, our ability to imagine a better future ultimately can bring about a better future. And what is a better way of portraying an alternate reality than a movie?
But I also think that one of the most important things is hope. If you can create hope in people, that is the beginning of a path to peace. People without hope will not make peace. So one can work towards that. And that's what we are trying to do in the Parent Circle, is to create hope. And when you think of what the life of Palestinians is like now, after all the new agreements, there's a sense of betrayal and no hope. And we have to work on that, because that's the only way that we will get out of this. They have done some research now at the Hebrew University on hope. I'm not talking about hummus and chibukim. I'm talking about something much cleaner and much deeper. And it's quite extraordinary to see what the results of that, because generally the one side thinks the other one doesn't want peace. And that's what we have to break through to get this hope. Also for Israelis and religious and non-religious, we have to listen.
Robbie, I wanted to share actually on the moment from your film, and I'm actually going to jump right into another moment of a film that you recommended to me, to talk a little bit about forgiveness and see some examples of how it's done. And it really resonated with me. And I think in the scene that I selected from the first clip you're going to see is from One Day After Peace, which if you've seen, it's a memorable moment, but it's just really a snippet of it out of the trailer. And the second scene is from Night's Journey into Day. A Night's Journey into Day. And that resonated to me also because I think it touches back on where we are in American society today, as far as I think about the question of forgiveness a lot when it relates to everything that's going on between Blacks in our community and the Black Lives Matter movement and the police. And I think you'll see that connection in a moment. So let me share these last two clips. Robbie, I'd love for you to comment on them, and then we'll have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So this will just take one moment, these clips.
But I was the minister, and I take the responsibility for what the police and some of the defense force people did to your children. Please forgive me what happened to your son, your family. Lord, please forgive me.
The TRC was based on the premise, the principle that it is possible for people to change. Otherwise, there was no point in having it.
I saw a film, I think it was in about 1990, Mississippi Burning. It was also about apartheid.
Shit, it's a cop.
Made quite an impression, especially the involvement of the police in the assassination of activists. I started realizing that that's actually not what policing is all about. It should rather be about protection than assassination.
Oh shit, we into it now, boys.
Then after that, I read Nelson Mandela's autobiography, and it changed my whole perspective.
Meneer Taylor,
Mr. Tyler,
zweer je dat die
do
vertellen?
you swear that the evidence that you have given?
So there's an example of a film that actually affected a police officer to go through change and find a way to reconcile. Robbie, I'd love to hear from you on this.
Well, Flock, the man who was washing the feet, was one of the most hated perpetrators in South Africa. And actually, part of the film was I went to ask him why he went to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And of course, I'm not shy. I said, did you do it just to get amnesty? And he was honest enough to say yes. That scene, he was actually responsible for the death of that woman's son. Now, in the beginning, I started to judge and think how patronizing. You come to the locations and you bring food. And if you really looked at the film, you'll see that his servant was carrying some of the food to his car. And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, he got amnesty. He could have stayed at home and done nothing. This is the whole question of judging other people. Who am I to say whether he was genuine or not genuine? This is a problem also. It's this judging and patronizing, but think he could stay at home. He didn't have to do that. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think we can learn so many lessons from that, because if you think about it, it was an opportunity for people to come and tell their stories, exactly what Avi was talking about, the perpetrators and the victims. And it was very, very painful for many of the victims. And one of the problems of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was that they never nurtured the victims afterwards enough. But there were wonderful lessons to learn from it. And I wish, I'm not saying that Israel and Palestine is South Africa, but we can learn from this ability to admit to your crimes from both sides.
Avi or Joy, do you have any reflections on this before I open it to questions from the audience?
Well, I just find it interesting. You know, it's I used to be a film critic, and by being a film critic, I kind of like to plant landmines in the screenplays I write. And so I will tell Joy something that she probably doesn't know. Her character's name in the movie is Anat. And Anat is a very, very popular name in Israel. And Joy plays somebody who finds tshuva, you know, who becomes Orthodox. But of course, Anat is the name of a Babylonian or Syrian goddess. So it's the most pagan name you could possibly choose for a young woman. And most parents in Israel who give this name to the children are completely unaware of it. I find this very ironic because, you know, I mean, here we are people who reach for such lofty goals, but those pagan elements are very much a part of us. And I think, you know, it's really, just like Robi said, you know, it's really important to accept that ultimately we are just really, really flawed. on both sides, and we do horrible things on both sides, and nobody can be totally acquitted from blame. And just by accepting the fact there's no real right and there's no real wrong, and the only thing that we come is to some kind of an acceptance through forgiveness and by letting go of the past. So the past becomes our greatest enemy, and the future becomes our greatest hope, which is why I think, Robbie's movie is so extraordinary.
I think there's something called the culpability of victims. This is a terribly difficult subject which really requires a lot of talking. But if you think about it, my child was in the occupied territories in a uniform. The man who killed him didn't kill him, he killed his uniform. That's a very difficult thing for me to say, but that's the truth. And when we start to tell the truth, that's when it opens up this possibility of reconciliation. I'm not talking about forgiving. Forgiving is terribly personal. I don't even really know what forgiving means for myself. I know that I'm totally at peace with myself. But I do know that this whole way of working together and of discovering the humanity of the other is just the beginning. It's just the beginning. And Flock was washing the feet of this woman because that's a Christian habit, and he became a Christian. And I often ask myself if he became a Christian in order to expiate himself from his crimes. You see, there's no black and white in all of this. It's so gray, but you have to look deep into yourself and to tell the truth. And that's really difficult in this case. Did I really mean it when I wrote the letter to the family? Did I really mean it? I didn't ever say, I forgive you. I don't think that's important. I want to meet this man because I need to complete this whole cycle of what I've been doing for all these years. And hopefully we'll get a new government at some point and they'll allow me to go into the jail to meet with Saya. It's important for me, but it's not what everybody needs to do at all. This is very, very personal.
I want to note that Yom Kippur is also a time for remembrance, and to take a moment to think about that. And for those who are connecting through film, know that film is also a way to remember and to preserve and to keep. So it's another connection here that we can discuss for hours, but I know we're almost out of time and it's very late in Israel, and I want to get in two questions from some of our members who have been waiting very patiently. I also want to note that we apologize. There's been a lot of pressure on the server for these films this weekend. The films will be available once you've purchased for 48 hours to watch them, so you could watch them. And of course, today you could purchase them for free with the free code. So be sure to watch the films in the next couple of days. And we apologize that the servers overloaded. Over 1,000 people actually have registered for these films in the last couple of days. I want to open the floor now to, we mentioned film critics, Hannah Brown. Hannah.
Hi, Isaac. Hi, everybody. So while I was listening to it reminded me of a line from, does people remember The Good Wife, the TV series with so one of the early episodes, Alicia says to her husband, I can't forgive you unless I know what I'm forgiving you for. And I think I think in the other story that part of the kind of the core of the movie is that the hero has to discover what he's really done. Like, I think that's part of the whole issue with forgiveness, that you can't apologize, you can't ask for forgiveness or get forgiveness until you really understand the impact of what you've done. And I just wonder what Avi and Robi think about that.
I'm doing a lot of work on restorative justice, and I'll tell you a very quick story. I like telling stories. I went to a conference in San Sebastian, and there was the head of the Basque terrorist movement who'd been in jail for 20 years. And some of the victims that he was responsible for. Plus there was a man there who'd been involved in a train blowing up in Italy in the 80s from the Red Brigade, together with the daughter of somebody that he had killed. It was an extraordinary conference. And then he said, I asked people to forgive me. And the Italian got furious and said, you have no right to ask people to forgive you. Giving is a gift. If they want to forgive you, they will. And if you ask it and they don't want to, you will make them feel even worse than they already are. It's an interesting topic. Should you ask for forgiveness? There's a wonderful man in Ireland called Alistair Little, who killed a Catholic and went to jail for 13 years. And while he was in jail, he went through a whole transformation. And he said when he came out, I cannot ask for forgiveness. It's not my right. It's questionable. I don't know what the answer is, but that's in the air.
Avi?
It's, you know, one of the things that the other stories examines closely is the importance of truth, or the importance of being earnest, as Oscar Wilde said. You know, it's truth is something that we all aspire for, and sometimes one wonders whether we aspire too much for, because there's a scene in the movie where Joy and her father drive in the car, and Joy is somebody who just refuses to lie. She would never lie, and she just insists on truth to such an extent, and the father finally explodes and says, listen to me, I mean, you don't understand life. There are things which are more important than the truth. You know, there's family, there's love, you know, our children, there's a future. You know, I mean, we put the truth on such a pedestal that sometimes we don't understand the truth, because that Palestinian guy who did that terrible thing to Robbie's son, you know, believed in his own truth, and her son believed in his own truth. And it's completely extraordinary for me to hear how she completely understands, you know, the way that drama unfolded. For me, she's a heroine. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. And yet, you know, the truth does not give us much relief. What gives us relief, you know, is a story that we can accept. And the story is very often not true, which brings us back to the beauty of cinema. Because, you know, I do not make documentaries. I make fiction because I think fiction creates a truth, you know, creates an alternative reality, and one that we can accept together and we can live together. Because again, if you go back to the cold hard facts, you know, God knows how blacks live in America. How can you undo slavery? How can you undo the Holocaust? You know, for the Palestinians, 1948 was sort of a catastrophe. I mean, you cannot undo the past. So, you know, I always preferred mythology to history, and fiction in cinema is mythology, and mythology can you know, give one reason, you know, to accept and to forgive and to create a new way of life. So for me, truth is something that I'm very fond of, but I understand its limitations sometimes.
I wanted to say something about America. I watched Charlottesville, and I remember the mother of this young woman who was killed said, you may have killed my daughter, but you've magnified her name. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be extraordinary if white Americans, you don't have to look for radicals, just the ordinary white privileged American who suffers from all kinds of prejudice, and African Americans who had slavery backgrounds would have gone to the park where the statue was, and each one would have told a story about why they thought it should stay or why they thought it should go. Can you imagine? It's not that they'd all become Martin Luther King and hug each other, but what they would do is understand how the other sees it. That's the beginning of empathy. And there's so many things that we do that I think could easily be exported to America and to all over the world for that matter.
It's amazing the power of telling stories and for others to hear the story. And I think that's what we're all doing here. and sharing tonight. I'm going to take, if you'll allow me, we'll have one more question from Leah Kroll before we sign off. Leah.
So my question comes from a story. So I am in California. It's 2:00 in the afternoon, and on Yom Kippur afternoon, we read the martyrology of all the rabbis who were killed by Hadrian. So what happened to Rabbi Akiva and the two rabbis who blocked the way for other rabbis to escape, and they were, they were filled, they were shot with all these arrows, and it goes on and on and on, and you like understand what happened. So that's a story. It's a story of our tradition, and it's always told on Yom Kippur afternoon. So my question is, are there any circumstances when forgiveness is not possible?
I don't see an option where forgiveness is not possible, because the lack of forgiveness dictates catastrophe, and the lack of forgiveness dictates an inability to survive. I mean, forgiveness is a wonderful mechanism for the human race to save itself from annihilation. And again, we discussed vengeance before. Vengeance is a perfectly valid human emotion, human sensation. And yes, they killed all these rabbis, and yes, they should be killed for it, and so on and so forth. But there's no end to it. So that is a story, and a counter story has to be invented as to prevent bloodshed. And when people speak highly of justice, I'm very dubious of justice, because God knows in the name of justice you can get a lot of people killed. And for me, the only interesting thing is not to have more children of mothers like Robbie get killed for this cause or that cause, and to find a story that is acceptable for two warring sides to tolerate each other. Again, I love this verb, to tolerate. It's such a humble
I hate
verb.
the word tolerate. Don't use it.
No.
What you're saying.
No. Tolerate is what we can strive for. And anything else is expecting too much of the human race.
No.
I mean,
but I just wanted to ask this lady, I'm sorry I didn't see her name. If you tolerate somebody, that's really not a very good idea. But I wanted to ask her what her definition of forgiving is, because it's such a personal thing. How does she see something? What does she think forgiving is? Where is she?
Leah, are we able to unmute her? Yeah. You're on.
I think that forgiveness is being able to let what's in the pit of your stomach, the anger, go, so that you don't have to keep living that over and over again, and be able to move on to a new life. For me, that's forgiveness.
A really good idea.
I love it that there's different opinions here, first of all. But most of all, for me, I'd say tshuva is also, and forgiveness is very much not just about it being inside, but also action. And to know that, especially now as we enter a new year, to take action of change, and to make sure that we don't make those same mistakes again, and have truly changed. I want to give a huge thank you to Robbie, Avi, and Joy for being here for this conversation and enlightening us on Yom Kippur. I couldn't have I can't think of a better way to spend this one. Please check out all the upcoming films on the JCC Manhattan's website, the Marlene Myerson JCC Manhattan. Of course, check out The Parent Circle. Check out all of Avi Nesher's films, and Joy's upcoming HBO Max TV show. You're all going to be like, I saw her there. Most importantly, everyone, please stay healthy. Let's have a healthy year. Let's get this all behind us so we can all meet in person very soon. For those of you fasting, good luck with the rest of it. And we look forward to seeing you soon in person or virtually. Have a good night, and thank you very much. Shana Tova, everyone.
Toda rabah.